You know that feeling when you're lying next to someone you trust, someone you chose, and something small shifts. Not a fight, not a moment you could point to, just a feeling. Like the floor moved half an inch and only you felt it. And you don't say anything. Because saying it out loud makes it real. Because maybe you're wrong. Because you love them, and love is supposed to be enough to make the feeling go away. It doesn't always go away. Sometimes it grows into a question you can't stop asking. Sometimes it grows into something you found, a text, a test result, a thing they said too quickly, a thing they didn't say at all. And sometimes it grows into something quieter than that. Something that doesn't have a name yet. Just a weight. The kind you carry to work and carry home and set down on the nightstand and try not to look at before you fall asleep. This is a place for those things. Not the cleaned up versions, not the parts people say in daylight. The parts people finally let themselves say at 1 a.m. to a stranger because a stranger felt safer than anyone who actually knows them. People send in what they've been holding, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for years. What they whispered to themselves in the car on the way home. What they typed and deleted and typed again. What they finally said out loud. Whatever brought you here tonight, I don't think it was an accident. Maybe you're carrying something that sounds like what you're about to hear. Maybe you just needed to know that other people carry things too. That the weight you've got isn't proof that something's wrong with you. It's just proof that you're paying attention. There's someone who wrote in this week, and they were paying attention. They just didn't like what they found. First story begins. The coffee maker in our apartment had this one setting that never worked right. It was supposed to brew at a specific temperature. Renata had read somewhere that the water had to be exactly 200 degrees. Not boiling, not lukewarm, exactly 200. And she'd spent 45 minutes on a Saturday morning calibrating it when we first moved in. It never actually worked. It always ran a little hot. But every morning she'd pour her cup, take that first sip and say, perfect anyway. Every single morning, like she was willing it into being true through sheer repetition. I think about that a lot now. How she could decide something was perfect and just make it so. In her mind, at least. We'd been together for 3 years when it happened. 3 years in that apartment on the second floor of a building in Columbus, Ohio. The one on Indianola with the parking lot view and the radiator that clanked at 3 a.m. like it was trying to send a message. We had a system. Sunday nights were grocery nights. I cooked on weekdays, she cooked on weekends. We had a spot on the couch. Her left side, my right. And if we ever ended up switched around for some reason, neither of us could get comfortable. We didn't talk about it. We just always ended up back in our spots. That's what I mean when I say it felt like home. Not the apartment. The routine. The fact that there was a place in the world where the unspoken rules made sense, where nobody had to explain themselves, where I knew exactly how she took her coffee, and she knew I couldn't sleep with the closet door open, and we'd both just quietly accommodated those things without ever making them a conversation. I was safe there. I genuinely believed I was safe. Her name was Renata Voss. She had dark hair she always wore up at work and down at home, and she smelled like cedar and something floral when she came through the door in the evenings. Whatever was in the lotion she kept at her desk. I can still place that smell. I wish I couldn't. She worked with a woman named Diane. I had met Diane exactly twice, once at a work party, once at a birthday dinner, and both times she'd been perfectly pleasant and entirely forgettable to me. She was just a name Renata mentioned sometimes. Diane said this. Diane and I grabbed lunch. Background noise. The kind of name that populated a life without ever meaning anything. I didn't know Diane had a theory about me. It was a Tuesday in March. I remember the specific weight of the day because I'd had a long one, a client meeting that ran 2 hours over, a commute that turned a 25-minute drive into an hour and 10, and I'd walked through our door at 7:40 p.m. carrying takeout containers and the particular exhaustion that lives somewhere behind your eyes. Renata was on the couch. Not her side. The middle. Which I noticed, somewhere in the back of my brain, but didn't think about. She didn't say hi. I set the food on the counter and said something like, "Thai place was slammed. Sorry it took so long. Normal sentence. The kind of sentence that belongs to a normal Tuesday. Where were you last Thursday night? Just like that. Not hello, not how was the drive. Just that question, sitting in the middle of the room like something she'd placed there deliberately. I said, what? Last Thursday, you were home late. You said you were finishing up at the office? I was. I had been. There was a deadline on a proposal and I'd stayed until nearly 9, which I'd texted her about, which she had responded to with a thumbs up emoji at 8:17 p.m. I know because I went back and looked at my phone 30 seconds into that conversation, trying to anchor myself to something solid. I was at the office, I said. Renata, I texted you? Diane saw your car. I stopped. Diane saw my... What does that mean? Diane saw your car parked outside an apartment complex on Bryden Road at 7:30 on Thursday night. She lives on that street, Marcus. She knows your car. She described it exactly. You know that feeling when someone says something and your brain just refuses it? Like the sentence reaches your ears and then stops because there's nowhere for it to go? I stood there holding my phone with the text thread pulled up and I felt something in my chest go very, very still. That's not possible, I said. I wasn't on Bryden Road. She took a photo. She showed me her phone. And there was a car. A dark gray Honda Accord. The same make as mine, the same color as mine, parked on a residential street at dusk. The license plate wasn't visible. The photo was taken from across the street, slightly blurred, the kind of shot you take quickly from a phone you're trying to keep discreet. It wasn't my car. I know it wasn't my car. I know where I was. I have the parking garage receipt on my phone, time-stamped 9:04 p.m., 6 miles away, which I showed her. I showed her right then. She looked at it for a long moment and then she said very quietly, "That could be from any Thursday." And something in me just broke open. Not in anger. In something worse than anger. In this horrible, helpless recognition that I was standing inside a story that had already been written, and my evidence was just inconvenient to the plot. Renata. I could hear how my voice had changed. Smaller. Careful. Who do you think I was visiting? Diane thinks it might be the woman from your office, the one you mentioned, Priya. Priya? My colleague Priya, who was engaged, who I had mentioned exactly once in a passing conversation about a project we'd worked on together. A name I had offered up without a second thought because I had nothing to hide. And now that name was sitting in the room between us like an accusation with a face on it. I have never been to Priya's apartment. I don't know where Priya lives. I barely know Priya. You said she was smart. Yes, she is smart. That's Renata. That's not... You lit up when you talked about her. Ha! I actually laughed. I don't know why I laughed. It just came out, this short, disbelieving sound, and I watched Renata's face go hard when she heard it, like my laughter was its own kind of confession. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not laughing at you. I don't know how to respond to that. I lit up. I don't remember the conversation. I do. And the way she said it, quiet, certain, the same voice she used when she said, perfect over her coffee every morning, I understood that nothing I said was going to matter. She had already decided. She was just waiting for me to confirm it. The days after that were a specific kind of quiet I had never experienced before. We didn't break up. Not right away. We existed in the apartment in this careful, terrible way, still sleeping in the same bed, still moving through the same routines, but with this space between us that hadn't been there before. A space with weight. A space that pressed. I went looking for evidence of my own innocence. Do you know how strange that is? To dig through your own life looking for proof that you are who you thought you were? I found the office keycard logs. I took a screenshot. I found an email I'd sent at 8:52 p.m. that Thursday from my work computer. I compiled it all into a kind of dossier, this pathetic, meticulous little case for myself, and I showed it to her one night at the kitchen table. She looked through it. All of it. I believe you were at the office. I waited. I just don't know if that's the whole story. I stopped trying after that. Not because I was guilty. Because I realized that proof and belief are not the same thing, and I had been confusing them for weeks. I could paper the walls with evidence and it wouldn't touch whatever she had already decided in the part of her that had decided it. Diane's blurry photograph had taken root in a place my receipts couldn't reach. I started drafting texts I never sent. Long ones, short ones, ones that were basically just please. I'd write them out in the Notes app on my phone and then sit there reading them back and think, to what end? To what end? We ended things in May. A gray Saturday which felt appropriate. I don't trust myself anymore, that I didn't know how to go back to before. Which I understood, I think. Which I even respected in a way, even as it was gutting me. She took the coffee maker. I got a new one that actually works at the right temperature, and I still can't make a cup of coffee that tastes like anything. Here's the thing I've never said out loud to anyone who knows my name. I've started to wonder, sometimes, in the way you wonder about things at 2 a.m. when your brain won't leave you alone. I've started to wonder if I'm remembering Thursday right. I have the receipts. I have the emails. The evidence is there. But memory is a strange thing. Memory is a story you tell yourself, and stories shift. And I've told this one so many times now. To myself, to the walls of this apartment, to the version of Renata I still talk to in my head sometimes, that I can't always find the place where the real thing ends and the telling of it begins. I don't think I was on Bryden Road. I just can't remember anymore what it felt like to be completely certain. And I don't know if that's what guilt feels like. Or if that's just what it feels like when someone loves you and decides you're a liar. I'm still not sure those things feel different from the inside. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being the only one willing to say a thing out loud. But sometimes, and I want you to sit with this for a second, sometimes someone does say it. They hand you the whole, unguarded truth of themselves, and you realize you don't quite know what to do with that either. Honesty isn't always a relief. Sometimes it's a door swinging open into a room you weren't sure you wanted to enter. The mug was still warm when she told me. I remember that specifically. I was holding this wide ceramic mug that Delia had bought at a flea market in Asheville, the one with the uneven glaze that made it look like someone had poured a sunset into the clay and then changed their mind halfway through. I was holding it with both hands the way I always do when I'm cold, which I always am, even in July. That's just a thing about me. My hands run cold. Delia used to grab them without asking and press them against her face like she was warming herself on me, and I always acted annoyed. And I never was. Her name was Delia Marsh. And she had this way of arguing that I've never seen in anyone before or since. She argued carefully. Like she was handling something fragile. Most people, when they fight, they reach for the biggest word they can find and throw it. Delia would slow down. She'd get quieter. She'd say, "Okay, but help me understand your side," and mean it. And somehow, that was the most disarming thing in the world, because you couldn't stay defensive against someone who genuinely wanted to understand you. That was the thing that got me. Not her laugh, not the way she looked, the way she fought fair. You don't find that very often. We'd been together 2 years and some months when this happened. Long enough that we had a language, not just inside jokes, but a whole private shorthand. Long enough that she knew I needed 10 minutes alone after work before I could be a person again, and I knew she processed things by going quiet first and talking second, sometimes days later. Long enough that we'd stopped performing the good version of ourselves and were just us. The real us. The one that leaves dishes in the sink and gets irritable about nothing, and falls asleep on the couch watching documentaries about medieval architecture. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had no business still standing, honestly. There was a radiator in the bedroom that clicked and hissed all winter like it was trying to communicate something urgent. The bathroom light took 4 seconds to warm up, so every morning started in this brief amber dimness, this soft delay before the day came into focus. And there was one floorboard, just one, right outside the kitchen doorway that creaked in this very specific, almost melodic way. I can still hear it. I can still feel the particular give of it under my foot. We were happy. I'm not going to just say that and expect you to believe me, so let me tell you this instead. On Sunday mornings, Delia would make what she called emergency eggs, scrambled, overcooked, with too much pepper, and she made them badly on purpose because she said perfect eggs on a Sunday felt like pressure, and she didn't want Sunday to have pressure. And I would sit on the counter, because I'm a counter-sitter. I've always been a counter-sitter. And I would drink my coffee and watch her be deliberately bad at cooking eggs, and I didn't know that was happiness while it was happening. I know it now. The conversation started on a Tuesday. I want to be clear about that. It was a Tuesday, which meant nothing was elevated, nothing was charged, there was no occasion. She'd had a long day. I'd had a medium one. We'd ordered Thai food and eaten it on the couch with the coffee table pulled close, the way we always did, and some forgettable show was on in the background. And I remember she'd been a little quiet, which I noticed, but didn't push, because that was our agreement. You don't push the quiet, you wait for it to become words. The show ended. She used the remote to bring up the menu screen, and then she just held it there. Didn't pick anything. And she had this way of holding the remote when she was thinking, pressing the edge of it against her bottom lip. And she was doing that. And I watched her do it for a moment. And then she said, "Can I tell you something that I've never told anyone?" And I said, "Of course." Because that's what you say. Because I meant it. She didn't look at me right away. She looked at the menu screen, all those little thumbnail boxes of shows we hadn't watched yet, and she said, "I need you to not react weird right away. I need you to just sit with it for a second before you say anything." Which, you know, when someone says that, your brain immediately starts running through categories. Health thing. Family thing. Something about the relationship. I went through all of them in about 2 seconds. And then she told me that for a long time, years, she said, years before me, she'd had this particular thing she was drawn to. A specific kind of dynamic. The kind where control is negotiated, where one person holds a kind of deliberate authority and the other person chooses that. Chooses to be held within it. She used careful words, Delia words, the kind she always used when she was handling something fragile. She said she wasn't ashamed of it. She said she'd done a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, and she knew it was something she needed to be honest about with someone she loved, and that someone was me. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm just asking you to know who I am. I was still holding the mug. It had gone cold by then, but I didn't put it down. I think I needed something to hold. You know that feeling, when your hands need something to do because your brain is suddenly doing too much? That was me. That was exactly me. I heard distantly the neighbor's television through the wall. Some laugh track. Something canned and cheerful, completely indifferent to what was happening in our living room. I said, and I've thought about this a lot, the specific words I chose. I said, "I don't know what to do with that." Which wasn't wrong exactly. But it wasn't right either. It wasn't enough. I could see something shift in her face when I said it. Not hurt, not quite. More like a bracing. Like she'd expected something like this and had prepared for it and was now executing the preparation. Which was somehow worse than if she'd just been hurt. That's okay. You don't have to know right now. And then she picked a new show, and we watched it, and neither of us said anything else that night. I want to tell you what was happening in my head, but the honest answer is, it wasn't organized enough to describe. It was more like a snow globe that someone had just shaken. All these pieces of what I thought I understood about us, about her, about what we were to each other, just suspended. Floating. Not settled. I didn't sleep well. I lay there listening to the radiator click and hiss its urgent nonsense, and I thought about the 2 years of her I had in my memory, and I kept trying to fit this new piece into the picture. And it didn't not fit. That was the thing. It wasn't incompatible. It was just new. Unknown. And I thought I knew her. I thought the picture was complete. The days after were strange in this very quiet way. I moved through the apartment differently. I noticed it, how I'd step around the creaking floorboard now instead of through it, like I was trying not to disturb something. How I'd find reasons to be in a different room when I didn't actually need to be. Not avoiding her exactly. More like I needed a little extra space around myself to think, and the apartment wasn't quite big enough for that. You don't have to know right now. She gave me room. That was very Delia. She gave me room without making it a thing, without asking every day where I was with it, without pushing the quiet. I loved her for that, and it also made it harder somehow. It would have been easier if she'd pushed. Then I could have organized myself around responding to her. Instead, I just had to sit with my own unorganized self. I did some reading. I want to be honest about that. I went looking for information, context, some framework that would help me understand what she'd described. And what I found was, it was more considered than I'd expected. More thought through. There were whole communities of people who talked about it with this real seriousness, this care. And that helped a little. But it didn't answer the actual question, which wasn't, is this legitimate? I knew it was legitimate. The question was, am I the person for this? About a week later, we tried to talk about it again. We were in the kitchen. She was making actual good eggs this time, not emergency eggs, which in retrospect felt like a signal. She was taking this seriously. She wasn't trying to make it easy. I was sitting on the counter like always, and she said, I don't need you to have an answer. I just want to know if you're still thinking about it or if you've already decided. And I said, I'm still thinking. And she said, okay. I should have told you sooner, I know that. I didn't say anything to that. I wanted to say it's okay, but I wasn't sure it was. Not yet. And I didn't want to say a thing I didn't mean just to ease the moment. So I held my coffee mug, a different one this time, a boring blue one from Target, and I looked at the window over the sink, at the particular gray of a November morning in a city that doesn't do winter gracefully, and I said, I just need a little more time. Which was true. Which is still true, honestly. I've been trying to figure out how to end this, what the tidy conclusion is, and I keep coming up empty because there isn't one. Not yet. Maybe not ever, in the way you want a conclusion to feel. What I know is this. I love Delia. That part didn't move. Through all of it, through the snow globe and the bad sleep and the careful distance in my own apartment, the love didn't move. And I know that she was brave to tell me. I know that it cost her something to say it out loud, to hand it to me, and trust me not to drop it. I don't know if I'm the person for what she needs. I'm still sitting with that question, turning it over, looking at it from different angles. I'm trying to be honest with myself about the difference between this isn't for me and this scares me. Because those are different things, and they lead to different answers. And I owe her the real one. Some mornings I still sit on the counter. She still makes emergency eggs when the week has been hard. The floorboard still creaks when I stop trying to avoid it. The mug with the uneven glaze is still in the cabinet. I haven't used it since that Tuesday. I don't know why I keep noticing that. And sometimes it doesn't end. It just becomes part of the furniture. Something you step around in the dark because you've learned where it is. You stop expecting it to leave. You just learn to live in the same space as it. You know that feeling when you find out something about someone you love and suddenly the room is the same room, the couch is the same couch, their voice sounds exactly like it always has. And yet you're standing somewhere slightly different than you were before. Not far. Just a step to the left of where you used to stand. And you can't quite find your way back to the exact spot. You keep almost getting there, but not quite. That's the thing about intimacy. It's not just closeness. It's exposure. Yours. Theirs. And sometimes what gets exposed is something you didn't know you weren't ready for. He's going to tell you about a night he picked up a phone. He's not sure why he's telling anyone still, but here he is. And there's something in his chest that's been sitting there ever since. Quiet and heavy, and not quite leaving. Just listen to him for a minute. There's this thing Marcus used to do every morning. He'd wake up before me, always without fail, like his body just decided 6:47 was the time, and that was that. and he'd fold his side of the blanket back over me. Not tuck me in exactly, just lay it down gently, like he was trying not to disturb the air. And I would lie there, half awake, listening to him start the coffee, and I would think, this is what safe feels like. This specific, quiet thing, this man who folds the blanket back over you before he leaves the bed. We'd been together almost 3 years at that point. Long enough that we had a rhythm. Long enough that his habits had become part of my days in a way I stopped noticing, the way you stopped noticing a painting on a wall you've lived with for a while. He left his keys on the left hook, never the right. He said sounds good at the end of every phone call, even when things weren't particularly good. He drank his coffee in 2 long sips before he added anything to it. Just stood there, holding the mug with both hands, taking it in straight, like he needed to greet it properly before he made it into something else. I loved that about him. I loved the specificity of him. The way he existed in the world with these small, unshakable rituals. We had an unspoken rule. Or maybe it was spoken once and then just became air, became the background noise of us. We didn't go through each other's phones. Not out of secrecy. Out of respect. Out of this mutual understanding that trust isn't proved by access. It's proved by showing up. And Marcus showed up. Every time. So the rule was easy. It never felt like a rule at all. It felt like just the shape of who we were together. I want you to understand what that felt like before I tell you what happened. I want you to sit in that for a second. 3 years of someone folding the blanket back over you. 3 years of sounds good and coffee held in both hands and keys on the left hook. 3 years of feeling like you'd finally found the place where your nervous system could rest. I want you to understand the before, because the before is the whole point. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I'd just gotten home from a work thing that ran long. One of those evenings where you're smiling at people for 3 hours and you come home feeling hollowed out in a specific, polite way. Marcus wasn't home yet. The apartment was quiet in that particular shade of dim that happens when the sun has just gone but you haven't turned any lights on yet. I sat down on the couch and picked up his tablet from the coffee table. Mine was in the bedroom and I didn't want to get up. I just wanted to look at something mindless, a video, a recipe, anything. He had a cooking app I liked. He wouldn't care. We did this all the time, borrowed each other's devices for small, ordinary things. His Instagram was open. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't in his messages. I wasn't searching. The app was just there, open to his DMs, because that must have been the last thing he'd had up before he set the tablet down. And there was a name I didn't recognize. And a thread. And the preview line. Just the preview line, the little slice of text you see before you open it, said something that made my brain do this strange, lurching thing. Like a car that hiccups on a cold morning. Like the engine turning over once, twice, and then just stalling. You know that feeling? When you read something and your mind just refuses it for a second? Like it needs a moment to catch up to what your eyes already saw? Like there's a brief, merciful delay between the information and the understanding of it? That's where I was. Sitting in the almost dark. Holding his tablet. In that 1 second gap between seeing and knowing. I opened it. I don't want to quote it. I'm not going to quote it. What I'll tell you is this. The tone was warm in a way that felt private. Familiar in a way that suggested history. There were references I didn't understand. Inside references, the kind that build up between two people over time, the small coded language of closeness. And there was a message from Marcus, sent 11 days ago, that said something careful and soft and specific in a way that I had only ever thought he was specific with me. I put the tablet face down on the cushion next to me. I sat there. I didn't move. I just sat there in the dim apartment and listened to the refrigerator hum, and felt something happening in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't pain exactly. It was more like pressure. Like something was taking up space where space hadn't been taken up before. My hands started doing this thing, just opening and closing in my lap. Opening and closing, like they were trying to hold on to something that had already passed through them. I picked the tablet back up. I read it again. I put it down again. I did this 3 times. The thing that I couldn't stop coming back to, and I mean couldn't stop, like a tongue finding a sore tooth over and over, involuntary, helpless, was one phrase. Not even a sentence. Just a few words that Marcus had written to this person, this name I didn't know, that I had heard him say to me. In a different context, maybe. In a different arrangement. But the feeling behind the words was the same. Or it seemed the same. Or I couldn't tell anymore if I was right about that, or if I was just someone who thought they knew what their partner's warmth looked like and had now lost the ability to trust that recognition. That's the part that got me. Not the possibility of what it was, but the sudden vertiginous uncertainty about my own ability to read the person I thought I knew better than anyone. If I was wrong about this, what else was I wrong about? I rehearsed saying something to him. In my head, while I sat there, I went through it probably a dozen times. Hey, I picked up your tablet. I wasn't trying to look, but I saw... I need you to tell me who that is. And then I'd imagine his face. And I couldn't make it do the right thing. I couldn't make his face in my imagination look like the face of someone with a clean explanation. I also couldn't make it look like the face of someone guilty. It just looked like Marcus, which suddenly felt like no information at all. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just need to understand what I read. I said that one out loud, actually. To the empty apartment. Just to hear how it sounded. It sounded thin. It sounded like someone trying very hard to be reasonable while something unreasonable was happening inside them. I didn't say anything when he came home. He came in at 7:40. I heard his keys on the left hook. I'd turned a lamp on by then and moved to the other end of the couch, and when he came around the corner, he looked at me and said, "Hey, you're home early? How was the thing?" And I said, "It was fine. Long? You know how those go." And he nodded and went to the kitchen, and I listened to him open the refrigerator and decide against it and close it again. We ate dinner. I made pasta because it was fast and I needed something to do with my hands. We talked about his day. Something about a meeting that ran over, a coworker who kept interrupting. I nodded. I asked follow-up questions. I was present in all the visible ways. And the whole time, underneath it, there was this other thing running. This quiet parallel track. This voice that kept saying, "Look at him. Look at how normal this looks. How does it look so normal? How are you sitting here eating pasta and it looks so normal?" I watched his hands on his fork. I watched him chew and think and gesture when he was making a point. I watched him be himself. Completely, uncomplicatedly himself. And I felt this horrible splitting sensation. Like I was looking at something I loved and something I didn't recognize at the same time. Like a photograph where the image is slightly doubled. Where the edges don't quite line up. He laughed at something he said. That laugh I know so well. The one that starts in his nose a little before it gets to his mouth. And I laughed too. I laughed the right amount at the right time. I don't know how I did that. I don't know where that came from. After dinner, he folded himself onto the couch next to me and put the TV on, and after a while he fell asleep with his head tilted back and his mouth just slightly open, the way he does. And I sat there next to him in the blue light of whatever was playing, and I looked at him and I thought, I don't know if I'm the person I thought I was in this relationship. I don't know if the version of myself that felt so certain, so settled, so safe, I don't know if that person was seeing clearly, or just seeing what she needed to see. That's the thing about doubt. It doesn't just change what you think about the other person. It changes what you think about yourself. About your own eyes. About whether you can trust the things you've been so sure of. I still haven't said anything. I've thought about it every day since that Tuesday. I've picked up the sentence and put it down again the way I put down that tablet. I've turned it over. I've looked at it from different angles, trying to find the version of it that doesn't make me feel like I'm about to step off something. And here's what I keep landing on. Not a conclusion, not an answer, just this one question that sits in the middle of everything. What do you do when the doubt isn't about what you found, but about whether you're someone who can tell the difference between something real and something you're afraid of? Some nights I lie there and listen to Marcus breathe next to me, and I feel the blanket he's folded back over me. And I think this is still the same. This specific quiet thing. This man and his rituals and his 2 long sips and his keys on the left hook. And I think, or maybe I just don't know him the way I thought I did. And I think, or maybe both of those things are true at the same time. And I don't know. I genuinely, honestly don't know. And I'm not sure which is harder, the not knowing, or the fact that I've gotten so good at lying in the dark next to someone and letting the question just live there, unanswered. Still, there's a particular kind of silence that follows a story like that. Not the silence of resolution, the silence of someone sitting very still, holding something they don't quite know where to put yet. He found what he found, and now he has to figure out who he is in relation to it. Whether he stays, whether he goes, whether either of those choices makes him the person he thought he was. That's the thing about love. It keeps asking you questions you didn't know you'd have to answer. The next person who wrote to us, she wasn't asking whether to stay or go. She was asking something harder than that. She was asking what it means to know someone, really know them. Whether the person standing in front of you, the one who held your hand, the one you let in, whether that person and the thing they just told you about their past can exist in the same sentence. In the same room, in the same heart. He told her something about who he was before she knew him. Something he'd kept folded up and quiet, and then he didn't anymore. And she had to decide what to do with that. Not what we'd do, what she did. That's where we're going now. The smell of his coffee is what I remember first. Not the conversation, not the moment everything changed. Just the smell of his coffee, the specific dark roast blend he orders from some small place in Vermont, the one that comes in a brown paper bag with a hand-stamped label, and how it filled our whole kitchen every morning like a promise. That's where I was, standing in the kitchen, second cup, barefoot on the tile, watching the light come through the window above the sink the way it does in October. That particular October gold that makes everything look a little more significant than it probably is. Marcus was still asleep. That was our thing. I'm a morning person. He is profoundly, almost defiantly not. So I'd have an hour, sometimes more, just me and his coffee and whatever book I was in the middle of. And then I'd hear the floorboards in the hallway. There's one that creaks, third from the bedroom door, and I'd know he was coming, and I'd pour his mug before he even reached the kitchen. He never asked me to, I just did it. And he'd come around the corner looking genuinely surprised every single time, like he couldn't quite believe someone had thought of him. Like that small thing was more than he expected from the world. That's the thing about Marcus. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He is, he was, he is. I don't know which tense I'm using anymore. He is genuinely one of the most considerate people I have ever been close to. Not in a performed way. Not in the way some people are kind because they want you to notice. In the quiet way. The way where he'd remember you mentioned 3 weeks ago that you were nervous about a work call, and on the morning of that call, there'd be a note on the counter. Not a long note, just a few words. You've already done the hard part. This is just talking. Tucked under my keys so I'd see it on the way out. That's who he is. That's the person I know. Which is why I keep trying to figure out how to hold what I found out. It was a Saturday. Late October, same season, different year. We'd been together almost 3 years by then. I was looking for a specific photograph. We'd been talking about doing something with the walls in the hallway, finally framing some things, and I remembered he had an old external hard drive somewhere with photos from before we met. And I thought, I'll look, see if there's anything worth printing, surprise him with it. He'd said, weeks before, it's in the closet on the top shelf, the black one. So I found it, plugged it in. And I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. Not to defend myself, but because it matters to how I understood what happened next. I was looking for photographs of him at 24, 25. Maybe a hiking trip. Maybe something from when he lived in Portland. What I found first was a folder labeled with a woman's name. Diane. And I don't know why I clicked it. I think I thought it might be a relative. I think I thought, family photos, maybe that would be sweet. But it wasn't a relative. It was, a lot, emails, screenshots, a document that looked like it had been copied from somewhere official. Legal language. I saw the words restraining order before I fully understood what I was reading. And then I read it again. And then I sat down on the floor of our bedroom closet and read the whole thing. Marcus had been in a relationship before me, several years before me, and it had ended badly. That's an understatement. The way it ended involved a restraining order taken out against him. It involved documented incidents. Showing up where she was after she'd asked him not to. Repeated contact she'd asked him to stop. The document was careful, legal, dry, the way those documents are. But underneath the language, if you knew how to read it, was a woman who had been frightened of someone I love. I sat there for a long time. I sat there until my legs went numb from the floor. You know that feeling when you're looking at something familiar and it just won't resolve? Like you're trying to focus and the image keeps sliding? That's what my brain was doing. I kept thinking, Marcus, the man who writes notes under my keys. The man who, when I had that awful month last winter, drove 40 minutes to bring me soup because I said I wasn't feeling well in a text. The man who has never once raised his voice at me. Not even close. Not even in our worst arguments. And we've had them. Every real couple does. The man who, when things get hard between us, goes quiet. Not cold. Just careful. Like he's choosing. I kept thinking, that person, is that the same person? I didn't hear the floorboard. I didn't hear him come down the hall. I didn't hear any of it until he was standing in the doorway of the closet looking at me on the floor with his laptop open on my knees, and he went completely still. The silence lasted, I don't know, 4 seconds, 10, long enough that it had a shape. Where did you find that? Not a question. The way you say something when you already know the answer and you're just buying time. I looked up at him and I said, the hard drive. I was looking for photos. Marcus, what is this? That's the worst thing I've ever done. I know that. I've known that. I said, she was scared of you. Yes. And I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, honestly. I didn't know whether to reach for him or move away from him. And I think that not knowing, that moment of my body not knowing what to do, that was the most frightening part of the whole thing. He told me more later. Not that night. That night I needed space, and he gave it to me without being asked, which is either evidence of who he is now, or evidence of how well he understands what he did, and I genuinely cannot tell you which. But a few days later, when I asked, he told me, I was 27. The relationship had been serious and it had ended badly, and I had completely lost myself in it. I've been in a dark place, a place I didn't fully recognize until I was out of it, and that I'd done things I couldn't justify. I've gotten help after, real help, years of it. I'm not asking you to be okay with it. I don't think you should be okay with it. I need you to know that I know what it was. And I believed him. That's the thing I keep turning over. I believed him. Not because I'm naive, not because I wanted to, but because I have spent 3 years watching this person and the person he described, frightened, unraveling, refusing to let go. I cannot find him in the man I know. I have looked. Since that morning in the closet I have looked, the way you look for something you're afraid you might find, and I haven't found him. But here's what I can't shake. She didn't know either. Once, she didn't know until she did. I went for a lot of walks that week. Just out. Around the neighborhood, no destination, one earbud in and one out the way I do when I need to think, but don't want to be completely alone. I'd walk past the houses I've walked past 100 times, and I'd think about the question I couldn't answer, the one that lives in the chest and won't sit still. Not who are you? I know who he is. I've seen who he is. The question is something smaller and more frightening than that. It's, people change. I believe that. I do. But how do you know when the change is real? How do you know you're not just the next person who doesn't know yet? I don't have an answer. I've turned it over until it's smooth and I still don't have an answer. What I have is this: a man who makes coffee I can smell from the bedroom. A floorboard that creaks, third from the door. A note I found 6 months ago, tucked under my keys. You've already done the hard part, that I still have in the pocket of my coat because I kept forgetting to take it out. And then I stopped trying to. What I have is a version of a person I love, and somewhere behind him, a version I never met, and the terrible, quiet work of figuring out whether those two things can be true at the same time. I think they can. I think they have to be able to be. Some mornings I stand in the kitchen and I smell his coffee and I wonder if she ever stood somewhere like this, in a morning like this, and thought the same thing. And I don't know what to do with that. I'm still figuring out what to do with that. Yeah. 4 stories. 4 people sitting across from something they didn't see coming, and didn't know how to hold once it arrived. There's a version of love that feels like solid ground, and then there's the moment you realize you've been standing on something that was never quite what you thought it was. Some of you heard that in the test result. Some of you heard it in a text you weren't supposed to find. Some of you heard it in a disclosure that changed the shape of everything, all at once. You showed up for all of it tonight. Not just the easy parts, the uncomfortable parts, the ones that made you shift in your seat a little. That's not nothing. Most people look away. I don't know where you are right now, what you're carrying home from this, what question is still sitting in your chest unanswered. But I think you already know more than you're giving yourself credit for. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't finding the truth. It's deciding what you're going to do once you're holding it.